I was born into stillness. Not the quiet kind that wraps you in peace, but the kind that fills a room when no one knows how to welcome a child. There were no balloons, no cooing voices, no warm hands waiting to hold me. Just the sound of the wind pushing against the wooden walls of a small shack, and the sigh of a woman too tired to smile. It was 1953, somewhere deep in the Appalachian foothills of eastern Kentucky. The town didn't have a name worth remembering. Just a few scattered houses, a church that doubled as a school, and dirt roads that led either to nowhere or back to where you came from. There was no hospital. I was born on a straw mattress that smelled of old fabric and would smoke. My mother, only 14, bit down on a towel so her screams wouldn't wake her own mother. My grandmother Josephine, who didn't care much for drama, even when it came from childbirth. They said I was a quiet baby. Didn't cry much. Maybe I learned early that noise didn't bring help. We lived in a one-room shack, Mama, Grandma Joe, and me. The floor was dirt, the roof leaked when it rained, and in the winter we huddled close around a tin stove that coughed more smoke than heat. There was no running water. The nearest well was a half-mile away. And the outhouse? Well, it was a splintered box perched over a pit, behind a thicket of briars that I learned to avoid even in my dreams. My earliest memories aren't of toys or lullabies. They're of silence. Of watching my mother's thin back bend over in the fields from sunrise till dusk. Of hearing the rough scrape of my grandmother's feet as she dragged herself from bed to chair and back again. Her face a permanent scowl shaped by poverty and pride. Mama was kind in her way. She'd hum old hymns while braiding my hair and sneak me extra cornbread when there was any to spare. But kindness is hard to sustain when life keeps kicking you in the gut. She had a tired love, soft but far away, like trying to hug someone through a pane of glass. And Grandma Joe. She was iron. Her hands were like bark, her gaze sharp as an axe. She never touched me unless it was to shove me aside or pull me by the ear. Sometimes I think she had forgotten what softness felt like. Other times I wonder if she ever knew. I remember asking once, must have been 5 years old, "Grandma, why don't you smile?" She didn't answer, just looked at me with those eyes that could quiet a room faster than thunder. Later that night, Mama whispered, "Don't ask her things like that. Some people ain't got smiles left to give." That stayed with me. You see, in a place like ours, silence is more than absence of sound. It's survival. You learn not to ask why there's no meat on the table, or why Grandma smells like liquor before noon. You learn to read faces instead of words. To tiptoe through moods like walking on broken glass. Strange looking back. Children are supposed to live in color. But all my early years feel like they were painted in gray. Still, there were moments of light. I had a corn husk doll I named Clara. She had no eyes, no mouth, but I talked to her anyway, told her things I couldn't say aloud. I'd climb the wild apple tree behind the house and pretend the leaves were pages of a book only I could read. On Sundays, when the preacher came to town, I'd sit on the church steps and listen to the hymns drifting through the open window, those voices rising to heaven from a world so far below it. Those were the fragments of magic I clung to. Because even in silence, a child's heart reaches for something bright. Now at 72, when I sit on this porch and feel the mountain breeze against my face, I think of that little girl. She didn't know what was coming. Didn't know that the silence would one day grow fangs. But she was brave in ways I didn't understand until much later. Brave enough to dream. Brave enough to survive. Here's what I've learned. Sometimes the world doesn't greet your first breath with joy. Sometimes it doesn't hand you a clean slate. It hands you a broken plate and says, "Make it work." But even in the ugliest beginnings, there is something worth holding on to. A whisper of something more. A seed of something better. No child should be born into silence. But if they are, may they someday find the courage to speak. Like I'm doing now. I was 7 the first time my body was used as currency. The morning it happened started like any other. The rooster cried too early. The cold air bit my toes as I stepped out of bed. Mama had already gone, off to clean the big white house on the hill where the mayor lived. She worked Sundays too when the money got tight, which was always. I was outside dragging a stick through the dirt, pretending I was drawing a map to somewhere better, when Grandma Joe's voice cracked across the yard. "Zelda, come in here now." I knew better than to hesitate. Her voice didn't carry questions, it carried orders. I dropped the stick and walked inside. She didn't look at me when I entered. just pointed to the metal tub in the corner. Wash up. Properly. Today you're going to help a man with chores. It should have felt ordinary. Our life was full of odd jobs and borrowed favors, but something about her tone felt different. Her movements were sharper, too. She laid out my best dress, the little white one with lace at the sleeves. The one I'd only worn twice, both times to church at Christmas. She brushed my hair harder than usual, pulling it into 2 tight braids. I winced when she tugged too hard, but she said nothing. Neither did I. I asked, "Are we going to church?" She glanced at me, just a flicker in the mirror. No questions. Just do what I say. Her hand shook when she buttoned my dress. That was the first sign. Grandma Jo never shook. Not even when lightning cracked the sky and the dogs howled in the dark. We walked for nearly an hour. Past the old tobacco barn, past the orchard that had long stopped blooming, past the sign that marked the edge of town. My legs ached, but I didn't complain. That was rule number 1 in our house. Never whine. The house we stopped at looked nothing like ours. It was brick, not wood. The porch didn't sag. There was a shiny car in the driveway, with mirrors so clean I could see my scared little face looking back at me. A man waited on the porch. He had thick gray hair, a round belly, and a red face that looked like it had been dipped in whiskey. He didn't smile when he saw me. He stared. "This her?" he asked. Grandma Jo nodded. 7. Just turned. Clean. Quiet. They talked like I wasn't there. Like I was a crate of eggs. He handed her something, money I think. She slipped it into her bra like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Then she turned to me. "Be good. Do what he tells you. I'll be back before supper." I grabbed her skirt. "Don't leave me." She looked at me then, not with love, not even with guilt. Just cold heartstone. "Stop it. This is work. For the family. Don't make a scene." I wanted to cry. But rule number 2 was worse than rule number 1. No tears. Especially in front of strangers. So I nodded. I don't remember walking through the door. I only remember the smell, stale smoke, sweat, and something sour like old meat. He led me down a hallway, into a room with heavy curtains that kept out the light. That's where the first transaction was completed. I won't tell you what happened. Not today. Not yet. There are parts of a story that take more than breath to say. They take strength and silence and time. But what I will tell you is this. Something was stolen from me that day. Not just my innocence. My belief that adults protect children. My sense of safety. My ability to trust. He told me I was a good girl if I stayed quiet. He told me if I ever spoke, he'd come back and hurt Mama. And Grandma. And me. I believed him. When Grandma Jo came back that evening, she didn't ask what happened. She didn't look at my dress, which was no longer white. She just said, "You behaved good. That's how it needs to be." We walked home in silence. The sun was setting, throwing long shadows on the red dirt road. I stumbled once, and she didn't even glance back. When we got home, Mama was there, tired and worried. "Grandma litt. Sick friend in town," she said. Zelda played with her kids. Got dirty is all. I sat on the floor, hands in my lap, mouth shut. That night, Mama held me close while I cried into the pillow. She thought it was a bad dream or growing pains. She didn't know I had already stopped growing. Not outside, but inside, where a part of me had curled up and gone still. You might wonder why I didn't tell her. But fear doesn't ask for permission. Fear wraps itself around your throat and teaches you to be small. And shame? Shame is the worst prison of all. That was the first transaction. But it wouldn't be the last. The next week we went to another house. And then another. Different men. Different rules. But always the same silence. Always the same lie. This is normal. It's woman's work. This is what girls are for. Here's the lesson I want to leave with you today, dear listener. When a child is betrayed by someone they trust, they don't just stop trusting that person. They stop trusting the world. And when trust is gone, healing becomes a mountain that takes a lifetime to climb. But I'm climbing it. Still. And I'll keep climbing. Until every child knows they are worth more than money in someone's hand. The first time broke something inside me. But it was the second time that taught me it wasn't a mistake. It was a system. After that Sunday, I thought maybe, just maybe, it had been a one-time horror. A terrible thing done by a terrible man. But hope when misplaced is a cruel friend. Because by the following weekend, Grandma Jo was preparing the same white dress. The one with the lace sleeves. The one that now made my stomach twist when I saw it hanging from the nail on the wall. This time there were no explanations. No half-lies about helping someone or earning food. She didn't need to lie anymore. She knew I wouldn't resist. And I didn't. Because I knew what resistance cost. I'd learned that silence meant survival. That compliance meant food. So I let her wash my face. Let her comb my hair. Let her braid it tight until my scalp burned. I remember staring at myself in the cracked mirror. 7 years old. Braided. Bathed. Dressed like a doll. But I wasn't a doll. I was an offering. We walked to a different house that day. Smaller. Dirtier. A man with a limp opened the door. He didn't smile. Just nodded. Grandma spoke quietly. He handed her money. And just like that, like passing a broom or a bucket, she handed him me. I won't tell you what happened inside. But you can guess. If you've been listening this far, you probably already know. Afterwards, she was waiting on the porch, sipping something from a metal flask. When I limped out, bleeding, shaking, she looked me up and down, then said, "You'll toughen up." That was the moment I realized she didn't just allow this. She orchestrated it. From then on, it became a routine. Some weeks once. Other weeks twice. When the money ran low, sometimes 3 or 4 times. She took me to houses in the hills, down back roads, through town. She lied to Mama each time. Always some story about a friend who needed cleaning or a neighbor offering free food. Mama was tired. Always tired. And in her exhaustion, she accepted the lies like medicine, bitter but necessary. I became numb. I stopped thinking of myself as a person. I became a thing. A thing that could be passed from one man to another. A thing that only existed between the closing of a door and the opening of it again. At first, every visit felt like dying. My body would tremble. My mind would scream. But when you scream and no one hears you, eventually you stop making sound. Some days I didn't even cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because crying didn't change anything. The men blurred together. Fat hands. Thin hands. Dirty fingernails. Gold watches. Some were rough. Some pretended to be kind. But they were all the same once the door closed. Over time, I developed a method of disappearing. Not my body, no, that stayed behind. But my mind? My mind would fly. I'd go to a field. In my mind, it was always spring there. The grass soft. The sky endless. There were flowers, wild ones, and a stream that whispered to me. There, in that place, no one touched me. There I was just a girl. A girl with dirt under her nails and sunshine in her hair. I returned to that field again and again. It saved me. I believed that with all my heart. It was a fragment of freedom in a life built on chains. The school I changed. I used to be bright. Quick. Miss Lorna once said I could go places. But soon I stopped answering questions. Stopped raising my hand. Stopped looking people in the eye. I drew strange pictures in my notebook. Dark shapes, crying faces. I flinched when touched. I wet the bed. I had nightmares that made me scream so loud the neighbor's dog howled. Miss Lorna called me after class one day. "Zelda," she said gently, "is something wrong at home?" I opened my mouth. The words were there. So close. But I looked at the door. And standing there silent, still watching, was Grandma Jo. She never picked me up from school. Never. Except that day. I lowered my head. "No, ma'am. Just tired." She watched me all the way home. That night she didn't say a word. Just left my dinner cold on the table and locked the door to her room. And the routine continued. When I turned 8, the visits changed. Some men wanted more time. Some wanted special things. Grandma started taking me farther. Sometimes by foot. Sometimes in the back of someone's truck. Once she stuffed me into the trunk of a car. Said it was safer that way. I couldn't breathe. It was dark. Hot. When the trunk opened, 3 men stood over me laughing. I was 8. I came home that night broken in places I didn't know could break. Bleeding. Burning. Sick with fever. Mama panicked. She bathed me. Held me as I shook. Asked what happened. Grandma said I'd fallen. That I was clumsy. That I bruised easy. And Mama believed her. Or wanted to. Maybe she was like me, learning how to disappear. When I turned 9, I started to bleed. Early, the doctor might have said. But I never saw a doctor. Grandma called it woman's time. I called it the beginning of the next level of hell. Because now the men paid more. She told me, "You're growing. You're worth more now. Worth more." I was never a girl. I was a product. An investment. A source of income that bled and cried and screamed inside. But I still went to school. I still walked home. I still saw birds in the trees. And that, I think, is the strangest part. The world kept going. The sun kept rising. As if it didn't know. Or didn't care. And maybe that's the cruelest truth. The world doesn't stop for broken little girls. It just learns how to walk around them. By the time I turned 10, I knew more about fear than most adults do in a lifetime. Fear had texture, color, rhythm. It had a smell like old sweat, whiskey, and rust. It had footsteps. Breathing. It lived in the walls of every room where a lock clicked behind me. But it wasn't the pain that broke me. Pain became a regular visitor. I had learned to expect it, even to brace for it. No, what broke me was the feeling that I had become invisible. That I could be screaming inside my head, bleeding, aching, and the world would keep spinning. The chickens would still cluck. The school bell would still ring. The preacher would still raise his voice on Sundays. I was 10 when I began to wonder if I would live to see 15. Not because I thought I'd die, but because part of me hoped I would. That's when something started to shift. It happened on a hot July afternoon. Grandma Jo was getting me ready again. Same routine. Same white dress, now worn thin from so many visits. She was tying my braids when I pulled away. Not hard, not loud. Just away. "Stop fidgeting," she snapped. I looked at her in the mirror. Really looked. And something came over me. Something I didn't recognize. My voice when it came out wasn't loud. But it was mine. "I don't want to go." She froze. Her hands hovered above my head for a moment, then dropped. "What did you say?" I swallowed. My heart pounded like a trapped bird. I said, "I don't want to go." She stared at me. The silence between us stretched until it snapped. The slap was so hard it knocked me sideways. I hit the wall, cheek stinging, vision blurred. She didn't yell. She didn't curse. She leaned in close and whispered, "Don't you ever talk back to me again. You live under my roof, you eat my food. If you stop working, you stop eating. Is that what you want?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. My lip was bleeding. She left me in the corner and walked out. But something had already changed. That small act, those 5 words, "I don't want to go," had cracked the armor of silence I'd worn for so long. The voice was small, but it was mine. And it had come from inside me, not the place she controlled. I wasn't brave the next day. Or the day after that. I still went when she told me to. Still obeyed. Still disappeared. But now something new was with me. A seed. A tremor. Question. What if I said no again? What if I ran? I began watching people differently. I noticed how my teacher, Miss Lorna, always lingered when I passed her desk. How she looked at my drawings, at my hands. How her eyes filled with something. Was it concern? Pity? One day after class she asked again, "Zelda, are you all right? Is there something at home that's hurting you?" I opened my mouth. The words gathered. They begged to be spoken. But I saw him again, one of the men. In my mind. Smiling. Saying, "If you talk, I'll kill your mama." And I saw Grandma Jo. Her belt. The locked cupboard. The shed. So I shook my head. "No, ma'am. I'm just tired." Miss Lorna put a gentle hand on my shoulder. I flinched. She pulled it away. "Okay, sweetheart. But if you ever want to talk, I'm here." That night I couldn't sleep. The words were too loud inside me now. The silence was no longer safe, it was suffocating. The next morning, I waited until Grandma Jo went to town. Mama was doing laundry out back. I approached her slowly, unsure. She looked up. "Zelda? What's wrong?" I hesitated. "Mama, Grandma's been taking me to places. With men." Her face froze. "What do you mean?" She makes me go in their houses. They give her money." Her jaw clenched. "Zelda, are you lying to me?" "No, Mama." Before I could finish, the slap came. Not as hard as Grandma's, but hard enough. "Don't talk that way about your grandma. She takes care of you while I work my fingers to the bone." I backed away. Her eyes were wet. Her hands trembled. But she didn't hug me. She didn't ask for more. She turned back to the laundry. And I turned back to silence. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My cheeks still burned. My mouth still tasted of blood. But the tremor inside me didn't go away. That voice, it was still there. Even wounded, even small, it hadn't died. And that gave me strength. Because now I knew something that Grandma Jo didn't. Once a voice learns to tremble, it can one day learn to roar. The first time I thought about escape, it wasn't some grand vision of freedom. It wasn't even courage. It was a whisper, small, ragged, born in the shadows of a sleepless night. I was lying in bed, curled up tight beside Mama. She was snoring lightly, her arm draped over me like she used to do when I was little. But the weight of her didn't comfort me anymore. I stared at the cracks in the ceiling, tracing shapes in the dark. My ribs ached from the last visit. There was still blood on my thighs that I hadn't been able to scrub off in the basin. And that's when the whisper came. You could leave. Startled me. Like hearing a voice that wasn't mine, yet came from somewhere deep inside me. Leave? Go where? The road outside was long and dark. The world was bigger than I could imagine. I didn't know anyone beyond the schoolhouse and the dirt lanes of our poor Kentucky town. But I knew one thing. Staying was death. Slow, invisible death, one visit, one lie, one bruise at a time. So I began to plan. Not loudly, not even with words, but in motions, in thoughts. I started to watch people carefully. Which neighbors left their homes unlocked? Which paths had bushes thick enough to hide in? Which houses had barking dogs? Which men looked away when I passed? And which ones looked too long? In class, while the others recited arithmetic, I memorized the layout of the town. Every road, every shortcut, every tree I could climb if I needed to hide. I listened. To the postman's route. To the time the train blew its horn in the distance. One day I stole a torn page from a geography book and tucked it into my dress. It had a map, basic sure, but it showed the next town over. I traced it every night under my blanket until the paper became soft like cloth. Then I began to gather supplies. A slice of cornbread hidden under the mattress. A coin dropped on the road and slipped into my sock. A small jar of salve I made from herbs behind the house, just like Miss Nancy used to do. Each item felt like a piece of armor. But even then, escape wasn't immediate. Fear is a sticky thing. It clings. It whispers back. What if you get caught? What if she finds you? What if you die out there all alone? But still I planned. Because the whisper had turned into a murmur. And the murmur had turned into a pulse. It happened one night after a particularly brutal visit. She had taken me to a place I'd never been, a house by the river. The man there was different. Colder. Calculating. He didn't just use me. He marked me. When I got back, I couldn't walk straight. I vomited twice before we reached the house. Grandma Jo barely looked at me. Just said, "Get some sleep." We got another appointment Thursday. That night I laid on the floor, too sore to climb into bed. The wood creaked beneath me. The shadows felt like hands. And the whisper came again. Run. I waited 3 more days. Until Thursday night. Mama was on the late shift cleaning the hospital. Grandma had fallen asleep in her rocking chair. The smell of whiskey on her breath. I moved like a ghost. Slow. Careful. Silent. I grabbed the cloth pouch I had sewn from an old handkerchief. Inside, 2 coins, a crust of bread, the torn map, a dried root Miss Nancy once gave me for cramps, and a folded note I had written to myself. It said only, "You are not a thing. You are a girl. And girls can run." I opened the back door. It creaked. I froze. But no sound came from inside. The wind was cool, brushing against my arms like a whisper of encouragement. I stepped onto the dirt path barefoot, carrying only my pouch and a pounding heart. The world outside was terrifying. The trees swayed like giants. Every cricket chirp felt like an alarm. The moon looked like an eye watching me. But I kept going. I walked until my feet bled. Until the sky began to blush with morning. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew what I was leaving behind. At sunrise, I reached a small chapel by the roadside. Old. Peeling paint. A crooked cross on the roof. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. It smelled like wax and dust. There was no one there. Just pews, a dusty Bible on the pulpit, and silence. I crawled under the last bench and curled up. That's where I stayed. All day. All night. My body throbbed. My mean spoon. I clutched the note in my hand and repeated the words again and again. You are not a thing. You are a girl. Girls can run. And I had. For the first time. I didn't know what would come next. If someone would find me. If I'd be taken back. If I'd survive. But I had made a choice. And sometimes even the smallest choice, to run, to hide, to whisper no, is the loudest scream a child can make. I don't remember falling asleep that night in the chapel. I remember the smell of old wood and wax, the way the floor pressed cold and solid against my cheek. But after hours of clutching my little pouch and whispering to myself, you're not a thing. You're a girl. And girls can run. I must have drifted off, because when I opened my eyes again it was morning. The light that filtered through the cracked stained glass window was golden, soft, and too quiet. First, I didn't remember where I was. Then it hit me all at once, the walking, the blood on my heel, the darkness, the running, the man, the rope of pain still wrapped around my waist like memory. I froze. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Then a voice. A woman's voice. Older. Steady. Familiar, like lullabies I never got. Child. I know you're in here. I couldn't breathe. I curled tighter under the pew. Held my pouch to my chest. She didn't shout. She didn't come rushing in. She just said softly, I saw the blood at the chapel steps. You're hurt. And you're scared. But I promise, I'm not here to take you back. I just want to help. There was something in the way she said help. Not as a transaction. Not like Grandma Joe. Not like the men. She said it like a gift. I didn't answer. But I peeked. And there she was. A black woman, maybe in her 60s, with silver hair tucked into a scarf, a long skirt dusted from the road, and a rosary wound tight around her wrist. In her other hand was a brown paper bag. My name's Florence, she said, her voice low, almost musical. I live down the road. I tend to this chapel when the preacher's out. She sat down slowly on the first pew far from me. Gave me space. Someone once helped me, she said. Now I try to help others. That's all. I didn't move. Couldn't. So she stayed a while. Didn't push. Didn't pry. Eventually, she stood and walked to the altar, placing the bag down gently. There's food in here. Some water. Bandages. I'll leave it. If you're gone by the time I come back tonight, I'll know you're not ready. She paused. But if you stay, I'll take you home. And then she left. I don't know how long I sat there. But eventually hunger won. I opened the bag. Inside was a boiled egg, 2 biscuits, a jar of sweet tea, a folded rag, and a small bottle of ointment. The kindness of it almost undid me. No price. No conditions. No whispered threats in return. Just help. I cried while I ate. Quietly, ashamed at the sound of my own chewing. That evening when the door creaked again I didn't run. Florence stepped inside and I stood. Barefoot. Sore. Still afraid. But standing. She said nothing. Just held out her hand. And I took it. Her farm was small, tucked into a gentle slope between the woods and a creek. It smelled like rosemary and wood smoke and something warm I couldn't name. There was a chicken coop, a small garden, a porch swing. Nothing grand. But everything safe. The moment we walked through the door, she whispered, You don't owe me anything. Not your story. Not your labor. Not your silence. She led me to a room with a clean bed, a soft blanket, and a bowl of warm water. That night, I bathed for the first time in weeks. She didn't watch. She didn't help unless I asked. Then she gave me an oversized nightgown that smelled of lavender, tucked me into the bed. And before leaving, she said, You're safe. Sleep as long as you need. I didn't believe her. Not really. But I slept for 2 days straight. When I woke up, Florence was in the kitchen stirring a pot. She smiled when she saw me. Not the smile of someone who wants something, but the smile of someone who's been where you are. I made stew, she said. And peach tea. Come eat. That was the start of something I never knew existed. Healing. Not fast. Not clean. But real. She never forced me to speak. But little by little I did. One word. Then a sentence. Then a whole hour spilling out stories I had locked away so deep they sounded like someone else's. Florence never flinched. She held my hand. She nodded. She cried sometimes. But mostly she listened. She taught me how to grind herbs, how to make salves and teas, how to mend broken chicken fences, and how to sing to tomato plants while watering them. Each day she gave me something simple to do. Nothing that demanded too much. Just enough to remind me that I could be useful without being used. She said healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about making something new with what was broken. And so I did. On her land, in her kitchen, under her roof, I planted the first seeds of myself. Not the girl Grandma Jo had raised to be a commodity. Not the ghost I had become. But something in between. Something becoming. She gave me a rosebush. "This is for the baby," she said one day, after I told her about the pregnancy forced out of me at age 12. "Plant it. Water it. Cry next to it if you need to. It's yours." I did. And it bloomed. Bright. Stubborn. Beautiful. Like something determined to live no matter the soil. I spent 3 months with Miss Florence. 3 months of quiet mornings. Of learning how to breathe again. Of learning how to be touched without shrinking. Of remembering what it meant to be called by name, not by shame. Eventually, she said, "You'll need to move on, child. This is safe, but it ain't forever." She had arranged for a shelter in Cincinnati, run by women who knew about girls like me. "But only if you're ready," she said. "No one will drag you. That time is over." And I was ready, not because I wasn't scared, but because kindness had shown me that I was more than what had happened to me. I was Zelda. A girl, not a thing. And girls? Girls can run. Girls can rest. And girls can rise. The first time I saw the city, it felt like a storm of sound and speed. Cincinnati rose up from the earth like something impossible. Tall buildings scraping the sky, cars buzzing like hornets, strangers brushing past each other like ghosts. It was the opposite of the woods and dirt roads I'd known, and I had never felt smaller. Miss Florence held my hand as we stepped off the bus. Her son Robert was with us too, carrying a little box with my few belongings. 2 dresses, a pair of shoes, a tin of salve, and the cloth bag with the rosebush seeds. The shelter was called St. Agnes House. It sat on the edge of a working-class neighborhood in a 3-story brick building with ivy crawling up one side. The front yard had daffodils. The windows had curtains. The front porch had a swing. It didn't look like a place for broken girls. But it was. We rang the bell. A woman in a gray habit opened the door. She was tall, thin, and serious like one of those old portraits in a church hallway. "Sister Catherine," Miss Florence said gently. "This is Zelda." Sister Catherine's eyes swept over me. Not with judgment. With attention. And something else, recognition. "I see," she said quietly. "Come in, child." Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and warm bread. Children's voices drifted from upstairs. Some were laughing. Some were shouting. Some just humming tunelessly. Sister Catherine led me down a hallway into a small office. There was a worn couch, a crucifix on the wall, and books everywhere. Books on shelves, books on the floor, books on the windowsill. "We take girls between the ages of 10 and 17, she said gently, sitting across from me. "They come from all over the state. Some were found on the streets. Others rescued by neighbors. Some brought by their own mothers when they realized what had happened. But all of them," she said, her voice firm now, "all of them are survivors. Like you." She didn't ask for my full story. Not then. She just handed me a small silver key on a string. "This is for your drawer. No one else will have it. Your things are yours. You are yours." Something inside me cracked at that. The idea of ownership over my own belongings, over my body, was still so new. Miss Florence didn't stay long. She hugged me tight, whispered, "Be good. Be strong. And plant those seeds one day, you hear?" I cried when she left. Alone again. But not in the same way. I was taken to a dormitory on the 2nd floor. It smelled like detergent and eucalyptus. There were 6 beds in the room, each one with a folded blanket and a small wooden nightstand. The girls inside paused when I entered. They weren't smiling. But they weren't unfriendly either. One of them, a tall girl with tight braids and sharp eyes, nodded at me. "New." I nodded back. She pointed. That bed's yours. I'm Nadine. Don't touch my tapes. The others snickered. Just like that, I was one of them. The next days were strange. Structure ruled everything. Wake up at 6 a.m. Chores from 6:30 to 7. Breakfast. Prayer. Group therapy. School lessons in the basement. Every minute had a purpose. To some, it felt like prison. To me, it felt like a soft padded rhythm, one that cradled instead of crushed. We weren't allowed to talk about details, unless we were in session. That was one of the house rules. No retellings unless there's a sister present. I didn't understand at first. But over time I saw why. Some wounds, when exposed too early, start bleeding again. Some girls had flashbacks from a single word. Some refused to speak at all for weeks. Others never stopped talking, their stories spilling out like floodwaters. I was somewhere in between. I didn't want to remember. But the memories wanted me. One night I woke up screaming. The other girls didn't yell at me. They didn't mock me. Nadine threw a pillow at me gently. Breathe, new girl. In and out. Count to 5. So I did. 1, 2, 3. By 4 I had stopped shaking. The next day, Sister Catherine gave me a notebook. Write it down, she said. All of it. The nightmares, the good dreams, the things you wish you could forget. I did. Every night I wrote. Sometimes just a word. Sometimes a whole memory. First it felt like peeling off scabs. But soon I started noticing something. Each word that came out hurt a little less than the one before. There were girls there who had lost more than I had. Girls who had scars inside and out. Girls who had been sold by their own fathers. Girls who never knew their mothers. But we became a kind of family. Not the sweet kind you see in books, but the kind built from shared pain and mutual survival. We braided each other's hair. We stole extra rolls at dinner and hid them under our beds for midnight snacks. We invented songs that made no sense. We celebrated birthdays with construction paper crowns. We watched each other like hawks, ready to warn if someone got too quiet, too sad, too numb. And we healed. In small, strange ways. Sister Agnes, the youngest nun, started teaching us how to garden in the backyard. Flowers don't bloom overnight, she'd say, digging into the soil. But the roots grow quiet, strong. I planted my rose bush there, the one from Miss Florence. It bloomed 2 months later. Bright, wild, pink like forgiveness. Every time I passed it, I whispered, "You are not a thing. You are a girl." Eventually, I believed it. By the end of that year, I was reading again, writing, smiling without flinching, walking without shame. I had friends. I had routines. I had choices. And I had one more thing, a future. The sisters helped me enroll in a GED prep class, taught me how to apply for a job, gave me a backpack full of supplies and whispered blessings as I left. On my last night, Nadine handed me a tape, one of her prized possessions. "You made it," she said, eyes shining. "Now go build something." So I did. With that notebook, that rosebush, that voice I had found, I stepped out into the city again, this time not as a frightened runaway, but as a survivor, a sister, a girl who had once run for her life, and now walked into it. The first time I spoke in public, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. It wasn't a speech, not a sermon, not even something planned. It was just a reading. At the Community Literacy Center downtown, a volunteer teacher had asked us to read a passage from the book we were practicing. Mine was a simple paragraph about planting corn, but I couldn't get the words out. My voice caught in my throat. The letters on the page blurred. My mouth went dry like it remembered all the times it had been told to stay shut. And yet I spoke. Slow. Broken. One syllable at a time. When I finished, the room clapped. Not loudly, not pitying, just warm enough to say, "You did it." That day, I walked home holding something new inside me. It wasn't pride exactly. It was more like reclamation. A part of me I thought was dead had whispered, "I'm still here." When I left the shelter, I moved into a room behind a boarding house run by a widow named Martha. The walls were thin. The stove hissed when you turned it on. But it was mine. Miss Martha gave me small cleaning jobs around the house in exchange for rent. I swept stairs. I changed bed sheets. I learned to budget my pennies and iron collars until they were crisp. And at night I went to class. The GED program was full of people like me. Older folks who never got to finish school, young mothers trying to catch up, teenagers who had slipped through cracks. No one asked about my past, and I didn't offer it. But the classroom became my sanctuary. I loved the scratch of pencil on paper, the weight of a full notebook, the thrill of solving an equation I once thought was witchcraft. I started carrying a dictionary in my bag, underlining words I didn't know. My teacher, Miss Elena, noticed. "You like language," she said after class one evening. I nodded. I used to write things down to make them go away. She smiled. "Keep writing. Not to forget, but to remember on your own terms." So I did. Writing became my way of breathing. Every night before bed, I wrote in a second-hand journal I'd bought for 50 cents at a thrift store. It had daisies on the cover and pages already yellowing at the edges. I wrote memories, dreams, questions, fears. I wrote poems I never showed anyone, some clumsy, some bleeding raw. Sometimes I wrote letters I never sent, to my mother, to the men, to Grandma Jo, to Miss Florence. Especially to her. In those letters I told her everything I couldn't say when she was alive. How I planted the rosebush. How I passed my math test. How I still couldn't stand loud voices. How I was trying. One night I wrote something different. A story. Not about me, not exactly, but about a little girl who ran barefoot through fields and knew how to speak to flowers. She carried a pouch of herbs and used her voice to protect others. I named her Zella, and for the first time I smiled at a story that came from pain. Because Zella wasn't broken. She was strong. And I had made her. Language gave me back myself. When I was younger, words were weapons used against me or forbidden. Don't tell. Don't scream. Don't talk back. Don't say his name. Don't speak unless spoken to. But now I had words for my pain. Words for my joy. Words to say no and yes and not yet, and that hurt, and I'm still healing. I remember sitting on the porch with Miss Martha one evening folding laundry. She looked over and said, "You're different now, girl.
You están taller.
You got a sound in your voice." A sound. She nodded. Like someone who knows her words matter. I didn't know what to say to that. So I said thank you. But inside something bloomed. Then came Mr. Augustus. He was a retired schoolteacher who rented one of the rooms upstairs. Always had a book in hand. Always humming old jazz tunes. He noticed me reading one of his books one day, Walt Whitman. "You like poetry?" he asked, surprised. I shrugged. "I'm trying." He smiled. "No one tries with Whitman. You just jump in and let the tide take you." He began lending me books. He'd write little notes inside, things like, "Look at the rhythm in this line." Or, "This reminds me of something you once said." Eventually I started writing back. Tiny letters left in his mailbox. Notes scribbled in the margins. A friendship bloomed. Gentle, respectful, and rooted in language. It was Mr. Augustus who suggested I enter the community storytelling contest. "You've got stories in you, Zelda. And not just the painful ones. Real stories. Hopeful ones." I laughed him off. Who would want to hear what I had to say? But he insisted. And 2 weeks later, I stood in a church basement in front of 30 strangers, with nothing but a single page in my hand. My story wasn't about abuse. It was about the first time I baked cornbread without burning it. About the laughter in the shelter kitchen. About how healing can be something as simple as planting a flower and watching it bloom. People clapped. Someone cried. And afterward a girl, not much younger than I had been when I escaped, came up to me. "Your story," she whispered. "It sounded like mine. But you made it less scary." That was the moment I knew. Words could be more than survival. They could be seeds, lanterns, bridges. From that day on I never stopped speaking. Not loudly, not always publicly, but honestly, softly, with purpose. I spoke to children in shelters, to women in recovery circles, to social workers, to students, to anyone who would listen, and sometimes to those who wouldn't. Because every time I spoke, I carved a little more space into a world that had once tried to erase me. And every time I listened, I gave someone else the room to do the same. That, I learned, is the real power of language. It doesn't just help us tell the truth. It helps us become it. The land was familiar and foreign at once. When I stepped off the bus, the first thing I noticed was the scent of the fields. Rich soil, wild grass, the sharp bite of pine. It was the smell of my childhood, but this time it didn't choke me. It grounded me. Miss Florence's old farm stood just as I remembered, though weathered now. The shutters hung crooked. The front steps sagged with time. But the rosebush, the one I had planted in the far corner by the fence, was in full bloom. Tall. Proud. Blazing pink. She had left it to me. In a will scribbled with shaky hands and sealed in a creased envelope, Miss Florence had given me everything. "This land is yours," she wrote. "Use it for something good. Let it be a place that heals." I stood on the porch that evening with her letter in my hand, wind tugging at the hem of my dress, and thought, this is where it starts. Not survival, but growth. In the beginning I lived simply. I repaired the roof with the help of neighbors, scrubbed the floors, hung fresh curtains, painted the door yellow like sunflowers. But more than anything I worked the soil. I cleared a plot by the back fence and planted herbs, lemon balm, lavender, chamomile, comfrey. Plants I'd learned from Miss Florence and from books passed down by Mr. Augustus. I remembered how she used to say, "Plants don't just heal the body, child. They teach you how to be patient, how to trust the process, how to let light in." Each morning I'd walk the rows barefoot, whispering to the seedlings. Each evening I'd water them like prayers. It didn't take long for the women to come. First it was Ruth. She was my neighbor's cousin, bruised in places that didn't show. Her voice barely a whisper. Then came Maria, with a toddler on her hip and fear in her eyes. Then 3 more. Then 6. They came because they'd heard about the herb woman. They stayed because they were seen. I didn't have degrees. I wasn't a doctor or a therapist. But I had an open porch, a kettle of tea, and a heart that knew what it was to be broken. And that was enough. The garden grew and so did we. We built a small shed where we dried herbs and brewed teas. We added benches under the trees where women could sit and rest. Some came just to breathe. Some came to talk. Others came to cry safely for the first time. I started calling it the healing garden. Not because I healed anyone, but because healing chose to happen there. In the rustle of leaves. In the smell of mint. In the soft murmur of voices telling stories long buried. We planted more: sage for strength, calendula for skin, peppermint for headaches, yarrow for wounds. Each plant had a lesson. See this one. I tell the younger girls, brushing my fingers over a rosemary sprig. This grows better when you touch it. Just like people. We cooked together. We journaled together. We sat in circles and learned how to listen without fixing, to hold space without judgment. I taught them how to identify safe herbs, how to prepare balms, how to make tea that soothes more than just a sore throat. And they taught me how to laugh again. How to trust again. How to live with joy, not just endurance. After a year, we had enough to open the door wider. We named ourselves the Wildflower Sisters. Not victims. Not even survivors. Sisters. Because that's what we had become. We printed flyers at the local post office. Held free workshops for women in town. Organized herb and healing days where anyone, regardless of background, could come learn and connect. It wasn't a shelter. Not yet. But it was a beginning. A middle-aged woman named Dolores came one day, holding her granddaughter's hand. "She's been quiet since it happened," she whispered. The little girl sat on my porch, eyes fixed on the rosebush. I knelt beside her. "You like flowers?" I asked. She nodded. "Wanna plant your own?" That day we gave her a pot, a trowel and a single marigold seed. She didn't say a word. But the next week she came back. And the week after. By the end of summer she was laughing with the other girls, teaching them how to dry petals for tea. That marigold bloomed right outside the kitchen window. Sometimes I was asked how I handled the weight of their stories. Didn't it crush me? Didn't it bring back everything I tried to forget? The answer was yes. There were nights I couldn't sleep. Dreams where hands still reached from the dark. Mornings when I cried in the garden before putting on the kettle. But each time I helped someone stand up straighter, breathe easier, or whisper the truth out loud for the first time, I felt stronger too. It was like composting pain, turning rot into nourishment, turning what nearly destroyed me into soil for someone else's rebirth. 2 years in, we held our first harvest gathering. A long table under the sycamore tree. Plates of food made by every woman. Laughter echoing across the field. Each woman brought something she'd grown. Not just herbs, but courage, friendship, a sense of self. I stood at the end of the table, the sunset painting the sky orange and gold, and raised my cup of elderberry tea. To the sisters, I said, and to the gardens we grow inside us. That night we danced barefoot in the grass. Some of us scarred, some of us still afraid, all of us alive. And for the first time since I was a little girl climbing trees in bare feet, I felt home. Came on a Monday. A plain envelope. No return address. Just my name, written in shaky cursive, barely legible. Zelda May. For a moment I stared at it as if it were a ghost. There hadn't been a Zelda May in years. Not since I chose to reclaim myself as just Zelda. No middle name, no old ties, no echoes from before. But the handwriting was unmistakable. I hadn't seen it in more than 2 decades. Yet my body recognized it before my mind did. My mother's. I sat on the porch with the envelope resting on my lap, the wind fluttering the flap like a beckoning finger. For a while I didn't open it. I just sat, staring out at the herb garden, breathing slowly, grounding myself. And then I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet. Folded once. No greeting. No apology. Just a few short lines. I heard from someone you're alive. I didn't believe it. But I prayed anyway. If you ever want to see me, I'm in Harlan now. Room 302. I'll understand if you don't come. There was no signature. Just the date. 3 days ago. That night I couldn't sleep. My body stayed still but my mind ran in circles. The girl in me screamed, "Don't you dare go back." The woman whispered, "But what if? What if she changed?" Forgiveness wasn't something I wore easily. I had learned to forgive seasons, storms, even the world. But people, especially the one person who had closed her eyes when I needed her to open them, that was harder. I remembered the slap, the bruises she never asked about, the silence she maintained even when my eyes were screaming for help. But I also remembered her tired hands, the way she hummed lullabies when she thought I was asleep, the fear in her voice the day I told her I wouldn't come back. She had been a child once too. Maybe, just maybe, she never had the chance to be anything else. By morning I had made a decision. Not for her. Not for answers. Not for closure even. I went for me. For the woman I'd become. To prove that I could face the past and not be shattered by it. I left a note on the kitchen table for Claire and Maria. Gone for the day. Be back by nightfall. See. I took a scarf, a small jar of rosemary oil in my pocket, something to ground me, and boarded the early bus to Harlan. The closer we got, the more the air felt heavy, like the road itself remembered. The bus dropped me 2 blocks from the address. I walked slowly, 1 step for each year I had spent in silence, 1 breath for each time I had swallowed a scream. Room 302 was at the top of a narrow staircase in a modest boarding house. I knocked once, twice, and then the door creaked open. She was thinner than I remembered, bent, hair grayer, hands more gnarled than I had imagined. But her eyes, those same hazel eyes, lifted to meet mine with a mixture of disbelief and something like reverence. "Zelda," she said. I didn't answer. Just looked. Took in the woman who gave me life and by omission, nearly let it be taken from me. "May I come in?" I asked. She stepped aside wordlessly. The room was small, clean, sparse. A Bible sat open on the table, pages dog-eared and worn. There was a picture on the wall, a young girl with a crooked smile. I didn't recognize her. Maybe a memory. Maybe a version of me she had held on to. "I didn't think you'd come," she said, her voice a whisper wrapped in regret. I sat. She didn't. She fidgeted with a cloth in her hands, twisting, untwisting. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry," but I know that word's too small for what happened. I nodded, unsure if I could speak yet. She kept going. "I didn't protect you. I didn't believe you. Not because I thought you lied, but because believing you meant admitting what my own mama did to me was real." She paused, the cloth now damp with sweat. "Every time I looked at you I saw myself. And I was too ashamed to see it all again." I looked at her then. Not the way a child sees a mother, but the way a woman sees another broken woman. "You were a victim," I said softly. "But you let the cycle continue. And I paid for that. Tears fell down her face. I know. We sat in silence for a long time. And then finally she said the thing I didn't know I needed to hear. You didn't deserve it. Not any of it. And I should have fought for you. I'm sorry I didn't. Part of me cracked. Not shattered. Not healed. Just softened. Because that child inside me had waited her whole life to hear those words. Before I left, she reached into a drawer and pulled out a faded envelope. These were yours, she said. I kept them all. Inside were 3 drawings, my old school sketches. A flower. A house. A little girl flying with wings made of leaves. I never stopped looking for you, she said. Even when I didn't deserve to find you. I stood. She reached out but stopped short. Instead, she just whispered, you became everything I couldn't be. Thank you. And in that moment I realized, forgiveness isn't always about saying, it's okay. Sometimes it's just saying, it happened. And I survived anyway. I left her room without promises, without reunion plans. But lighter. As if one of the shadows that had followed me all my life had finally dissolved. That evening, as I returned to the farm, Claire met me at the gate. Everything okay? She asked. I smiled. No. But it's better. And sometimes better is enough. The idea started with one broken woman and a kettle of tea. But by the time spring rolled around again, we were 12. 12 women. 12 stories. 12 different kinds of scars, some visible, most not. They came in silence at first. Shame clung to their shoulders like worn coats they couldn't shake. Most had been told again and again that their pain didn't matter. But when they stepped onto my porch, they found something unfamiliar. We believed them. No questions that started with, why didn't you? No judgment in our eyes. Just space. Just stillness. Just hands that held without taking. One afternoon as we sat peeling apples beneath the sycamore tree, Ruth, one of the first women who'd ever knocked on my door, looked up and said, you know what we are, right? We're wildflowers. We grow where nobody plants us. In the cracks. In the shadows. And we bloom anyway. And just like that, we had a name. The Wildflower Sisters. We weren't a legal nonprofit. We had no paperwork, no grant money, no official building. We had a kitchen with chipped mugs. A garden with herbs passed down by grandmothers long gone. A barn with mattresses laid out in a circle, like a makeshift womb. We had ourselves. And for the first time that felt like enough. Our days followed a rhythm all their own. Mornings were for tending the earth, digging, watering, harvesting. Midday we cooked together. Talked. Or didn't. Silence was welcome here. Evenings were for stories. Around the fire pit someone would start. My first scar was from. And the circle would nod. Not to fix. Not to interrogate. Just to honor. But as the circle grew, so did the need. One night, a woman named Jolene arrived in the middle of a thunderstorm. She held her baby like a shield. We have nowhere else, she said, soaked to the bone. We took them in. Wrapped them in blankets. Fed them warm soup. That night I sat up thinking. We needed more beds. More hands. More structure. More safety. So I made a decision. I gathered the women the next morning over cornbread and blackberry jam. We've grown into something bigger than I ever dreamed. I told them. But dreams can be built too. Brick by brick. I shared my vision. A dedicated space. Not just a farm but a refuge. Not just a healing place but a beginning place. A real sanctuary. They didn't ask how. They just nodded. They were ready. We began with what we had. Dolores donated a piece of land next to mine. Ruth's brother, a carpenter, offered labor in exchange for jars of comfrey salve for his aching joints. Maria taught basic literacy to some of the women in the evenings. Everyone gave something. Old quilts. Wooden beams. Even prayers. And slowly the Wildflower House was born. A pale blue structure with wide windows and a sign hand-carved by Claire. You are safe. You are loved. You are not alone. It became the home I had once begged the world for. The one no one gave me. We opened our doors with no fanfare. Just a quiet ceremony at sunset. 12 candles. 12 wishes. And the 13th. For every girl who thought she'd never have a place to rest. We didn't promise to fix anyone. We offered something rarer: time. And space. And belief. Over the years, our little circle expanded. We welcomed teenagers, grandmothers, mothers escaping violence with children in tow. Each one added something sacred to our shared fire. Some stayed months, some only a night, but each one left a thread behind, woven into the quilt of our collective healing. I watched women learn to laugh again, to sing again, to look at their own reflections without flinching. There was something holy about it, watching someone reintroduce themselves to their own soul. We taught skills: soap making, herbal medicine, farming, cooking. But mostly we taught each other presence. How to stay in your body. How to forgive the mirror. How to speak without trembling. And the ripple went outward. Some of our sisters opened shelters of their own. Some became counselors. Others returned to their towns and whispered to the next generation, "You are more than what was done to you. You can grow. You are a wildflower too." Years later, at one of our reunions, a young woman named Grace took my hand and said, "You gave me something I didn't know how to ask for. You showed me that survival isn't the end of the story. It's just the prologue." And that's when I realized, this wasn't just a healing farm. It was a lineage. One built on pain, yes, but also on resistance. And now on legacy. We never had a billboard. No social media page. No ad in the paper. But they still found us. The broken. The brave. The becoming. And when they did, we always had a cup of tea ready. A room with a quilt. A place in the garden where the soil had been waiting just for them. Because no one had done that for me. So I built it. So they'd never have to build alone. The letter came with an official seal. Heavy cream paper, embossed edges. The kind of envelope you'd expect from a law firm or a senator's office. Not something addressed to an old woman on a herb farm in Kentucky. First, I thought it was a mistake. I opened it with flour-dusted fingers, standing barefoot in the kitchen, a pot of elderberry syrup simmering on the stove. Inside, the words made my hands tremble. "Dear Ms. Zelda May, it is our honor to inform you that you have been nominated to receive the National Medal for Human Rights. In recognition of your work with survivors of abuse, your contributions to trauma healing, and your community-based empowerment model, you are invited to Washington, D.C., to accept this award at the annual Human Dignity Summit." I had to sit down. For a long moment, the room spun gently. Not out of panic, but out of disbelief. Me? Zelda May? Once sold like an object. Once hidden in attics and shacks. Once silenced, forgotten, discarded. Now called brave. When I told the Wildflower Sisters, they hollered and wept like I had won the lottery. "You're going," Claire said firmly. "We'll take care of the farm." Even my oldest granddaughter, Maisie, insisted. "Grandma, they need to hear you. All of you." I packed the rose-pink dress I wore when we opened the shelter. I tucked the little pouch of dried lavender that Miss Florence once gave me into my suitcase, like a talisman. And with trembling fingers, I boarded a plane for the first time in my life. Washington was colder than I expected. Everything there moved fast: cars, people, voices on the wind. But I carried with me something slower, deeper. A story. Not just mine, but thousands like it. When I stood behind the velvet curtain backstage, my heart pounded like I was 7 again. Standing in my church dress, waiting for something terrible to happen. But then I looked out at the crowd. Rows of faces, old and young, women with sharp suits and quiet eyes, men with notebooks and cameras. And I realized something. This time they had come to listen. Not to take. They called my name. Ms. Zelda May, community leader, trauma healer, advocate. I stepped onto the stage slowly, hands slightly shaking but eyes steady. The spotlight felt warm on my skin. I reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and took a breath that carried 70 years of memory. Then I spoke. I was 7 years old when I learned that the world doesn't always protect its children. I was sold. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. Sold by blood to strangers. Not once. Not twice. But many times. I grew up believing that pain was my purpose. That silence was my duty. That survival was the best I could hope for. The room was still. Even the lights seemed to quiet themselves. But I was wrong. Because what I didn't know then was that survival was just the beginning. That one day, the same hands that had once reached out for help would become hands that helped others. That the same mouth silenced by fear would one day speak not just for myself, but for every child still locked in a room, still too scared to cry out. I paused, letting the weight settle. I didn't go to college. I didn't start a nonprofit with a mission statement and a budget plan. I just opened my front door, brewed a little tea, listened with my whole heart. And somehow that turned into a movement. One woman at a time. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. So I stand here today not as a hero, not as a saint, but as proof that you do not need to be powerful to protect. You do not need to be perfect to lead. You just need to be willing to sit with someone in their darkest hour and say, "You are not alone." The room erupted in a standing ovation. But I wasn't done. I lifted my hand gently, and the room settled again. "I accept this medal," I said, voice thick with emotion. "Not just for me, but for Miss Florence, who pulled me off the dirt floor and gave me a name when I'd forgotten I had one. For every woman who stayed silent because the world told her to. And for every child right now, tonight, whose pain is still a secret. I see you. You matter. Your story is not over. And as long as I have breath in my lungs, I will keep planting gardens in the ruins. I will keep turning scars into maps. And I will keep whispering into the silence. You are still worthy of love." When I stepped off the stage, my legs were trembling. But I was standing tall. A man in a suit tried to hand me the medal. But I didn't take it right away. First, I turned to the woman beside him. She looked no older than 30, notebook in hand, wide brown eyes. I pressed the medal into her palm. "Hold this for me a moment," I said gently. "It doesn't belong to me alone." She nodded, tears on her cheeks. Later, when I was alone in the hotel room, I sat in front of the window and looked out over the city. I could see the Capitol dome glowing in the distance. And I thought of Miss Florence. Of my mother's hands trembling as she finally told the truth. Of my daughter sleeping safely under my roof. I placed the medal on the nightstand. Next to it, I put the pouch of lavender. One for recognition. The other for remembrance. Because bravery isn't standing on a stage. Bravery is standing in front of your own life. Day after day. And choosing to keep walking toward the light. Even when the dark still calls your name. I wake up before the sun these days. Not because I must, but because I want to. There's something sacred in those first moments of silence. When the world is still half asleep and the sky hasn't yet chosen its colors. I wrap a shawl around my shoulders, step onto the porch, and sip my tea as mist rises from the fields. The herb garden, now 3 times the size it once was, glows with dew. Lemon balm. Yarrow. Chamomile. Lavender. Each plant a story. Each root a memory. They say legacy is what you leave behind. But I think it's also what grows without you because of you. The children are grown now. Na has 2 little ones of her own, both with her quiet eyes and their father's deep laugh. Claire runs the House of Flowers now, organizing workshops and traveling to other states to train new advocates. And Matthew? He's the one who makes sure the earth keeps giving. Always barefoot, always humming, always with a seed in his pocket. I don't teach the classes anymore. My knees are too stiff, my memory a bit slower. But I'm still here. Still listening. Still answering the door when someone knocks with fear in their eyes and a suitcase in their hands. Still placing a hand on a shoulder and saying, "You made it. You're safe." Sometimes, when I'm alone in the garden, I speak to the ones who are gone. To Miss Florence. To Joseph. To the baby I lost at 12, whose rose bush now stretches up past my chest, thick, wild, fragrant with the life she never got to live. I don't speak out loud. Just with my heart. Thank you. I love you. I'm still trying to make you proud. A few months ago, I was asked to speak at the local high school. They were reading Flowers Among Thorns in their social issues class. Imagine that, my story written with trembling hands in the dead of night, now required reading for teenagers in small-town Kentucky. I stood in front of those bright-eyed students, some bored, some wide-eyed, and told them a simple truth. You don't have to go through what I did to carry the torch. You don't have to suffer to be strong. But if you ever meet someone who's lost their way, be the light they didn't know they needed. One girl stayed behind after class. Her name was Marley. She had freckles and shaky hands. She whispered, "Your book helped my mom leave my stepdad. She's learning how to smile again." I hugged her gently, and for a moment, it felt like every bruise I'd ever carried had a purpose. The farm is quieter now. I don't rush anymore. Don't measure my worth in how many lives I can fix. Instead, I water my garden. Write in my journal. Watch the bees return to the rosemary bush each afternoon like they're old friends visiting. And I dream. Not of the past. Not of men or rooms or screams swallowed in pillows. I dream of what's next. Of a world where girls grow up without flinching. Where grandmothers are guardians, not traffickers. Where stories like mine no longer need to be told because no child will ever live them again. Maybe I won't live to see that world. But I know it's coming. I've seen the seeds planted. One of my favorite stories is an old Cherokee tale Joseph used to tell. A grandfather tells his grandson, "Inside me there are two wolves. One is anger, bitterness, vengeance. The other is love, forgiveness, peace." The boy asks, "Which one wins?" And the grandfather replies, "The one you feed." I spent years feeding the wrong wolf. But I chose again and again to turn toward light. To grow things instead of destroy them. To believe that love, though slow and sometimes late, is still the strongest force we have. If you've made it to this part of my story, dear listener, thank you. Thank you for staying. For listening to an old woman with a weathered voice and a full heart. I don't know your story. I don't know your pain. But I know this. You're not broken beyond repair. None of us are. We bend. We crack. We bleed. But we also rise. We bloom. We begin again. Just like wildflowers after winter. When I pass, someday, not soon but someday, I don't want a monument. No marble statue. No carved stone. Just plant something. A tree. A rose bush. A patch of mint to remind someone that healing can smell sweet. Let the garden grow beyond me. Let the wind carry my story. Not as a tragedy but as a map. A reminder that pain doesn't get the final word. Love does. And love, when planted deep, always finds the sun.